I'm Corinne, 63 years old, and I never thought I'd end up sleeping in a garage of the home I once owned. The same home where I raised my daughter Jessica, where we celebrated holidays, and where my husband took his last breath. I gave it all to Jessica, out of love. But her husband Alan decided I was nothing but a burden. That cold garage became my reality until I made one phone call that changed everything. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This is a story about standing up for yourself when those you love push you aside. My story begins in Millbrook, a quiet suburb where Thomas and I purchased our Victorian home 35 years ago. It was our dream house with its wraparound porch, spacious rooms, and a garden where I grew the most beautiful roses in the neighborhood. We raised our daughter Jessica there, watching her grow from a pigtailed kindergartner to a confident young woman. Thomas and I had such wonderful plans for our retirement. Weekend trips to the coast, finally visiting Europe and hosting Sunday dinners for Jessica and whatever family she might create. But life rarely follows our careful plans. 5 years ago, Thomas complained about indigestion after dinner. By midnight, I was a widow. The heart attack was sudden and massive, leaving no time for goodbyes or final words of love. The following years were a fog of grief and adjustment. Our home, once filled with laughter and conversation, became painfully quiet. Every room held memories that both comforted and haunted me. The creaky third stair that Thomas always promised to fix, his reading chair by the bay window, the slight dent in the kitchen wall from when he tried to demonstrate baseball pitching techniques to 10-year-old Jessica. Maintaining the house became increasingly difficult on my own. The property taxes increased every year, and the old Victorian required constant maintenance. I found myself using most of my retirement savings just to keep up. Sometimes, I'd sit on the porch swing Thomas had installed for our 30th anniversary and wonder if I should sell the place, but the thought of strangers living in our home broke my heart. Jessica visited regularly, though not as often as either of us would have liked. She and her husband Alan lived in a small apartment about 40 minutes away. Alan worked in financial planning, and Jessica was a kindergarten teacher at a private school. They were trying to save for a house, but the real estate market had become impossible for young couples. Each time they lost a bidding war on a home, Jessica would call me in tears. Last spring, Jessica and Alan came for dinner. I made Thomas's favorite pot roast, a tradition I maintained despite his absence. Jessica seemed unusually nervous throughout the meal, barely touching her food and exchanging glances with Alan. Finally, as I served coffee, she reached for her husband's hand and announced they were expecting twins. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. After years of Jessica telling me they wanted to wait until they were financially stable, this news came as a wonderful surprise. Through happy tears, she explained they hadn't planned it, but were thrilled nonetheless. Their only concern was the apartment. It was barely large enough for 2, let alone 4. "We're desperate, Mom," Jessica admitted. "The lease is up in 3 months, and we can't find anything in our price range that would fit twins." I watched my daughter, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat stomach, and made a decision that seemed perfectly logical at the time. I had been rattling around a house too large for one person while my pregnant daughter couldn't find adequate space for her growing family. The solution was obvious. "Move here," I said. "This house should belong to a family again." Jessica's eyes widened. "Mom, we can't afford to buy this place. It's worth at least 3 times what we can qualify for." I shook my head and reached for her hand. "I'm not selling it to you, sweetheart. I'm giving it to you." The silence that followed was broken by Jessica's sob. She threw her arms around me, thanking me repeatedly. Alan sat stunned, his fork frozen midway to his mouth. When he finally spoke, his words seemed carefully measured. "That's incredibly generous, Corinne. But what about you? Where would you go?" It was a fair question. I explained my plan to move to a senior apartment complex that had recently opened downtown. It was within walking distance of shops and offered activities I had been missing since Thomas died. Most importantly, it would free me from the burden of maintaining a large house. I've already looked into it, I assured them. With the money I'll save on property taxes and maintenance, I can travel a bit like Thomas, and I always planned. As the evening progressed, we discussed logistics. I would transfer the deed to Jessica with the understanding that I would always have a home with them if my circumstances changed. Alan seemed particularly interested in the details of the transfer, asking about taxes and legalities. Looking back, I should have recognized his unusual focus, but at the time, I was simply happy to see my daughter's relief and gratitude. The next day, I called my longtime family lawyer, Franklin Winters, to arrange the property transfer. Franklin had handled Thomas's will and had been our family attorney for decades. He seemed surprised by my decision. "Are you certain about this, Corinne? This home is your primary asset." I assured him I had thought it through. Franklin insisted on adding a clause to the deed stating that I would retain the right to live in the home should I ever need to. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious, but I agreed. It seemed like a reasonable precaution, though one I never expected to invoke. The day I handed Jessica the deed was emotional for both of us. Alan took photos of us embracing on the front porch, Jessica clutching the documents that made her the official owner of her childhood home. I moved out 2 weeks later, taking only my personal belongings and leaving all the furniture for their use. My new apartment was cozy, if somewhat sterile compared to my Victorian home, but I decorated it with family photos and a few treasured items that had belonged to Thomas. Jessica and Alan moved in immediately and began preparing the house for the twins. Jessica called daily with updates about the nursery they were creating in the spare bedroom and how they were settling in. Every call ended with heartfelt gratitude and an invitation to visit whenever I wanted. After all, it had been my home for 35 years. I was always welcome. How quickly things can change. 6 months after I gave Jessica and Alan the house, I took a fall in my apartment bathroom. The doctors at Millbrook General confirmed I had fractured my hip. Not severely enough to require surgery, but enough to significantly impact my mobility. After 5 days in the hospital, my doctor expressed concern about me returning to my apartment alone. "You'll need assistance for at least 8 to 12 weeks, Dr. Sharma explained. "Ideally, someone should be with you, especially during the first month." I didn't have many options. Most of my friends were either dealing with their own health issues or had moved to be closer to their children. Home health care was prohibitively expensive. When Jessica visited me in the hospital and learned of my predicament, she immediately offered a solution. "Move back home with us, Mom. We have plenty of room and I can help you recover." I was reluctant at first. Their twins were due in 3 months and I didn't want to impose during such a critical time. But Jessica insisted, reminding me that the house was meant to be shared. "Dad would want you there," she said, invoking Thomas in a way she knew I couldn't refuse. "And honestly, I could use your help too. The doctor says I need to start taking it easier." I later learned that Jessica had developed mild pregnancy-induced hypertension. Her doctor had recommended reduced activity and regular rest periods. In a way, we would be helping each other. At least that's what I believed. Alan picked me up from the hospital in silence. While not openly hostile, his terse responses to my attempts at conversation suggested annoyance. I attributed his mood to stress about Jessica's condition and the financial pressure of preparing for twins. The house looked different when we arrived. The exterior was the same, but inside many changes had been made. My carefully selected curtains had been replaced with modern blinds. The walls, once a warm beige, were now stark white. Most notably, the family photos that had lined the hallway were gone, replaced with abstract prints. Jessica greeted me warmly, though she looked tired and uncomfortable in her advancing pregnancy. She showed me to my room, the smallest bedroom that had once been Thomas's home office. It had been hastily converted into a guest room with a twin bed, a small dresser, and none of my personal touches. My old bedroom, the master suite, was now theirs, which made perfect sense. The second largest bedroom was being transformed into a nursery. "It's not much," Jessica apologized, "but we thought you'd be more comfortable here than on the sofa." I assured her it was fine, though I couldn't help noticing that most of my belongings had been relegated to the basement or garage. Thomas's favorite recliner, which I had left in the living room, was nowhere to be seen. When I inquired about it, Alan mentioned they had moved it to the basement as it didn't match their new decor. I swallowed my disappointment. After all, it was their home now. The first evening set the tone for what would follow. We ate dinner at the kitchen table Thomas had crafted by hand, now covered with a trendy tablecloth that hid its beautiful oak grain. Alan dominated the conversation, talking about his work and the renovations they planned once the twins arrived. When I mentioned Thomas having built the kitchen cabinets himself, Alan changed the subject. After dinner, I offered to help with dishes despite my limited mobility, but Alan quickly declined. "We have a system," he explained. "It's better if you just rest. The doctor said you shouldn't be on your feet." Isolated in my small room, I felt like a visitor rather than family. I tried to focus on gratitude. I had a roof over my head and my daughter nearby. But as days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed in our relationship. By the end of my first week, Jessica's doctor had ordered bed rest due to her blood pressure concerns. This left me alone with Alan for much of the day. He worked from home 3 days a week, setting up in the dining room with his laptop and files spread across the table Thomas and I had hosted so many holiday meals upon. Alan established house rules that he claimed were meant to ensure Jessica got adequate rest. I was asked not to use the kitchen between certain hours to avoid disturbing Jessica with noise or cooking smells. The television volume had to be kept low, which was reasonable, but then Alan suggested I watch in my room rather than the living room to keep the common areas clear. Even my shower times were restricted to avoid using up hot water when Jessica might need it. When Jessica was awake, she seemed oblivious to these growing restrictions. If I mentioned feeling uncomfortable, she attributed it to my pain medication or reminded me that changes were necessary for her health and the baby's. I didn't want to stress her during a difficult pregnancy, so I kept my concerns to myself and tried to be as unobtrusive as possible. One afternoon, while Alan was at the office, I overheard him on the phone with Jessica from my room. Their voices carried through the heating vent, an old quirk of the house I had forgotten about. "I don't know how much longer I can handle this," he was saying. "She's everywhere watching everything we do. This was supposed to be our house, Jess." "It's only temporary," Jessica replied, her voice weaker than his. "She needs help right now, and she gave us this house, remember?" "Yeah, and she never lets us forget it. Did you hear her yesterday, going on about how your dad built the deck like we're supposed to keep everything exactly as they had it forever? We can't even make this place our own with her constantly reminiscing." I sat on my bed, tears streaming down my face. I hadn't realized my occasional memories were so unwelcome. From that day forward, I stopped mentioning Thomas or any history of the house. I became almost silent, afraid that any comment might be interpreted as trying to reclaim ownership. The situation worsened when Alan's friends visited for a game night. Jessica was asleep, and I remained in my room until I needed to use the bathroom. As I passed the living room, I overheard their conversation. "So, how's life with the mother-in-law?" one of them asked with a chuckle. "A freaking nightmare," Alan replied. "She's like this ghost from the past watching and judging everything. Jessica feels guilty because she gave us the house, but honestly, if I'd known she'd be moving in 2 months later, I might have reconsidered." The others laughed, offering their own mother-in-law horror stories. I retreated to my room without using the bathroom, humiliated and deeply hurt. This was the home where I had nursed Jessica through chickenpox and mononucleosis, where I had cared for Thomas through his battles with pneumonia. Now I was an unwanted ghost. I tried several times to have a heart-to-heart talk with Jessica, but Alan always seemed to interrupt, or Jessica would become emotional and blame pregnancy hormones for any tension. "Everything will be better after the babies come," became her mantra. I wasn't so sure, but I clung to hope that our relationship could be repaired. 3 weeks into my stay, I came downstairs to find Thomas's antique recliner being carried out to the garage by Alan and his brother. When I protested, Alan explained they needed the space for a glider rocker for the babies. "You don't even use this chair," he pointed out. "It's just sitting here taking up space we need." "That was Thomas's favorite chair," I said, my voice breaking. "He spent his last evening in that chair." Alan's expression hardened. "Well, Thomas isn't here anymore, is he?" "We are, with 2 babies on the way." Jessica, who had come to see what the commotion was about, placed a hand on my arm. "Mom, we're not getting rid of it. It's just going to the garage for storage. When we have more space someday, we can bring it back in." I knew it would never come back. The garage was where things went to be forgotten, not stored. But I nodded, not wanting to upset Jessica further. Later that evening, Jessica suggested that perhaps I might be more comfortable back at my apartment with some home health assistance. The message was clear: my presence was becoming too burdensome. I reminded her that my doctor had advised against living alone for at least another month, and financially I couldn't afford daily home care. Jessica looked torn, clearly caught between loyalty to me and to her husband. "We'll make it work," she finally said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Family has to stick together." But I was beginning to understand that in this new family unit, I was very much on the outside looking in. 3 months after I moved in with Jessica and Alan, my worst nightmare began. My hip was healing, though I still used a cane, and experienced significant pain by the end of each day. Jessica was now 8 months pregnant with twins and on strict bed rest due to preeclampsia concerns. We had settled into an uncomfortable routine where I spent most of my time in my small bedroom, emerging only for meals and necessary bathroom trips. One evening, Alan announced that his parents would be visiting for a week. They lived across the country and wanted to see Jessica before the babies arrived, as travel would be difficult after the birth. I had met them only once at the wedding and remembered them as pleasant but reserved. "They'll need somewhere comfortable to sleep," Alan explained at dinner. "We've been thinking about the arrangements." I nodded, assuming they would use the guest room in the basement that we had created years ago for Thomas's mother when she visited. "We think they should have your room," Alan continued. "It's more accessible than the basement, and Mom has arthritis." My heart sank. "Where will I sleep?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Alan didn't meet my eyes. "We've set up a space in the garage. It's quite comfortable. There's a cot and a space heater, and the half bath out there works fine." I stared at him in disbelief, then looked to Jessica for support. My daughter was studying her plate, her cheeks flushed. "The garage, I'm still recovering from a broken hip. A cot would be incredibly painful, and it's October. Even with a space heater, it gets cold at night." "It's actually quite mild for October," Alan countered. "And the doctor said your hip is healing well." "It's just for a week, Corinne. My parents haven't seen their son in 2 years. "Mom!" Jessica finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have any other options. The basement stairs would be too much for Diana's arthritis, and the sofa is too short for Jack to sleep on. It's just temporary." I wanted to remind them that this was my home too, had been my home far longer than theirs. I wanted to point out that there were other solutions, like putting an air mattress in the dining room or having Alan's parents stay at the hotel 5 minutes away. But the determination in Alan's expression told me this decision had already been made. "Fine," I finally said, "if that's what needs to happen." The garage conversion was even worse than I had feared. A metal cot with a thin foam mattress had been placed between boxes of Christmas decorations and gardening supplies. A small space heater sat on an upturned plastic crate, its cord stretched to reach the only outlet. A folding screen partially concealed the half bathroom, really just a toilet and tiny sink installed years ago when Thomas had considered turning the garage into a workshop. There was no insulation. October in Millbrook might be mild by some standards, but temperatures still dropped into the 40s at night. The concrete floor radiated cold, and drafts whistled through the gaps around the garage door. Alan had thrown a couple of blankets on the cot, but they were thin summer ones, hardly sufficient for the conditions. "It's just for a week," he repeated, already backing toward the door to the house. "Dinner's at 6 if you want to join us." If I want to join them. In my own house, I was now being invited to meals as an afterthought. That first night was one of the most difficult I had experienced since Thomas died. The cot creaked with every slight movement, putting pressure on my healing hip. The space heater created a small pocket of warmth that didn't reach the cot. I layered both blankets and wore my heaviest sweater, but still shivered through the night. Sleep came in brief snatches between pain and cold. In the morning, I made my way into the house, hoping for a hot shower and coffee. I found Alan's parents, Diana and Jack, seated at the kitchen table while Alan prepared breakfast. They greeted me warmly, clearly unaware of the sleeping arrangements. Diana embraced me, expressing sympathy about my hip injury and gratitude for the lovely guest room they had been given. "Corinne has been staying in the garage apartment," Alan explained smoothly. "She prefers the privacy." I opened my mouth to correct him, but Jessica entered the kitchen at that moment, moving slowly with her enormous belly. The conversation immediately shifted to her condition and the imminent arrival of the twins. I didn't have the heart to create a scene, especially with Jessica looking so exhausted and stressed. Throughout the week, a pattern emerged. I was effectively banished from family activities. When meals were served, there were often just enough chairs at the table, forcing me to eat in the kitchen or back in the garage. Alan took his parents sightseeing without extending an invitation to me. Evenings were spent with the four of them playing board games or watching movies while I sat alone in the cold garage. What hurt most was Jessica's complicity. My daughter, who I had raised to be kind and inclusive, now barely made eye contact with me. When she did bring me food or check on me, her visits were brief and uncomfortable. Once I tried to discuss the situation with her, but she quickly claimed fatigue and retreated to her bedroom. On the fourth night, I was woken by the need to use the bathroom. The half bath in the garage had developed plumbing issues, and Alan had promised to call a plumber, but hadn't gotten around to it. I made my way to the house, moving slowly with my cane on the uneven path. When I tried the door, I discovered it was locked. I knocked gently at first, then with more urgency, as the bathroom need became more pressing. After what felt like an eternity, Alan opened the door, hair disheveled from sleep and irritation plain on his face. "Do you know what time it is?" he demanded. "I need to use the bathroom," I explained, embarrassed to be discussing such matters with my son-in-law. "The one in the garage isn't working." He stepped aside wordlessly, watching as I limped to the hallway bathroom. When I emerged, he was waiting. "You need to plan better," he said in a low voice. "Everyone's trying to sleep, and start using the garage entrance. This door will be locked at night from now on." "The garage entrance has 3 steps with no railing," I pointed out. "I could fall again with my hip like this." Alan sighed heavily. "Fine, but keep the knocking to a minimum, and no more midnight bathroom trips." As if I could control such things at my age. I returned to the garage, now wide awake and fighting tears. Through the window, I could see my bedroom, my real bedroom, where Alan's parents were comfortably asleep in a proper bed, in a heated room with access to the house whenever they needed it. The contrast to my situation couldn't have been more stark. That night alone, on the uncomfortable cot, I broke down completely. This house had been my sanctuary for 35 years. I had raised my daughter here, loved my husband here, grieved him here. Now I was locked out, treated worse than a stranger. My own daughter couldn't or wouldn't stand up for me. I had given them everything and had become nothing in return. Something had to change. I couldn't continue living like this, my physical and emotional health deteriorating daily. As dawn broke, I made a decision. It was time to find out exactly what was happening in my former home and why my presence had become so unwelcome. The day after being locked out of my own house, I waited until everyone was occupied. Alan had taken his parents to visit a nearby winery, and Jessica was napping upstairs. My hip ached from the cold and the uncomfortable cot, but determination pushed me forward. I needed to understand why Alan had become increasingly hostile, why my daughter seemed unable to intervene. The garage had become a storage area for items Alan and Jessica didn't want in their house, but couldn't bring themselves to discard. Among these were several boxes of my belongings that had been gradually relocated from the main house. I began searching through them, hoping to find warmer clothes and perhaps a few personal items to make my exile more bearable. In the third box, beneath photo albums and trinkets from my life with Thomas, I found something unexpected: a stack of financial documents. At first, I assumed they were old papers of mine that had been packed away. But the dates caught my eye, all within the past 6 months since I had transferred ownership of the house. What I discovered sent chills through me that had nothing to do with the garage's temperature. Mortgage documents. Alan and Jessica had taken out a substantial loan against the house I had given them free and clear. The paperwork indicated they had borrowed nearly 70% of the property's value just 2 months after receiving it. Further digging revealed bank statements showing large withdrawals and transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. One name appeared repeatedly: Quickfire Investments, an investment firm I had never heard Jessica mention any major investment plans. Tucked beneath these was a folder labeled Business Ventures in Alan's handwriting. Inside were records of failed business attempts, all showing substantial losses. A cryptocurrency trading platform, a tech startup that never launched, a real estate flip that had gone dramatically wrong. My heart sank as the pieces came together. Alan had used my gift, the home I had lovingly maintained for 35 years, as collateral for risky ventures that had apparently failed. No wonder he resented my presence. Every time he looked at me, he was reminded of what he had squandered. But there was more. A final folder contained gambling receipts from online betting platforms and several casinos within driving distance. The amounts were staggering: tens of thousands of dollars lost over just a few months. I sat back on the cold concrete floor, documents spread around me, trying to process what I had discovered. My son-in-law had not only mortgaged my family home, but had apparently lost a significant portion of the money through poor investments and gambling. And Jessica, did she know? Was her complicity in my mistreatment driven by fear, shame, or something else? As I carefully returned the documents to their hiding place, my mind returned to the conversation I'd had with Franklin Winters, our family lawyer, when I had transferred the house. He had insisted on adding a clause to the deed, something about retaining my right to live in the home if needed. At the time, I had thought it unnecessary, a legal precaution that would never come into play. Now I wondered exactly what that clause entailed. I remembered the specific wording had been important to Franklin, though I had been too focused on Jessica's happiness to pay close attention. Something about guaranteed accommodation of suitable quality consistent with the primary residence. I doubt a cold garage with a broken toilet qualified as suitable quality. With trembling hands, I took out my cell phone. It was an older model that Jessica had insisted I upgrade from my flip phone when Thomas died. I rarely used it except for calls to Jessica or my few remaining friends. But now I scrolled through the contacts until I found Franklin's number. My finger hovered over it. Making this call would change everything. It could potentially drive a permanent wedge between me and Jessica. It might even affect my future relationship with my grandchildren. But continuing as I was cold in pain and increasingly unwelcome wasn't sustainable either. I thought about Thomas and what he would advise. My husband had always been my moral compass, the voice of reason when emotions clouded my judgment. He had also been fiercely protective of both me and Jessica. What would he think of how I was being treated in the home we had built together? What would he think of Alan's financial decisions and Jessica's silent compliance? I pressed the call button. Franklin answered on the third ring, his familiar, gravelly voice immediately bringing me comfort. "Corinne, this is a pleasant surprise. How are you?" "Not well, Franklin," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. "I need your help. It's about the house." I explained my situation, starting with my hip injury and moving through the increasingly difficult living conditions. I told him about being relegated to the garage, about the locked door, about the hostility from Alan and Jessica's inability or unwillingness to intervene. Finally, I shared my discovery of the mortgage documents and evidence of Alan's financial mismanagement. Franklin listened without interruption, though I could hear his occasional sharp intake of breath. When I finished, the silence stretched for several seconds before he spoke. "Corinne, I'm deeply sorry you're experiencing this. It's unacceptable on every level, and I'm especially glad I insisted on that clause in the deed transfer." "What exactly does it say, Franklin? I wasn't paying close attention at the time." "The house was gifted with the explicit condition that you would always have the right to suitable accommodation within it should you need it. Not a garage, not a basement, but proper living quarters consistent with the main resident's standard of living. Furthermore, the property cannot be used as collateral for loans without your explicit written consent." My breath caught. "Are you saying the mortgage is invalid?" "Potentially, yes. At minimum, it gives us significant leverage. Alan would have had to forge your signature or misrepresent the title situation to obtain that mortgage. Either way, it constitutes fraud." The implications were enormous. "What should I do? I don't want to make Jessica's situation worse. She's 8 months pregnant with twins and already on bed rest." Franklin's tone became gentler. "Corinne, I understand your concern for Jessica, but you need to consider that Alan's financial decisions may be putting her and those babies at risk as well. If he's gambling and making risky investments with the equity from your home, what happens when those fail? Where will Jessica and the twins live if the bank forecloses?" He was right, of course. This wasn't just about my comfort or dignity. It was about protecting Jessica and my unborn grandchildren from Alan's reckless behavior. "I need time to review the original documents," Franklin continued. "But I think we need to act quickly. Can you gather any evidence of your current living conditions? Photos of the garage setup, documentation of the broken facilities? Anything to demonstrate the unsuitable nature of your accommodation?" I agreed, already mentally cataloging what I would document. We arranged for Franklin to visit in 2 days when Alan's parents would be leaving. Just before ending the call, Franklin added one more piece of advice. "Corinne, don't confront Alan or Jessica about the mortgage or financial issues yet. Continue as normal until I arrive. We'll handle this properly with legal protections in place." After hanging up, I sat in the chilly garage, surrounded by the remnants of my former life, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. For too long, I had accepted mistreatment out of love for my daughter and fear of creating conflict. I had allowed myself to be gradually erased from the home I had given them, silencing my own needs and dignity in the process. No more. Thomas wouldn't have wanted this for me. Jessica's true self wouldn't want this either. Something had changed her, and I suspected Alan's influence and financial pressures were at the root of it. I carefully tucked the financial documents back where I had found them and began taking photos of my accommodations with my phone. The thin mattress on the metal cot, the inadequate space heater, the broken toilet, the concrete floor and lack of insulation, the boxes crowding the space and the makeshift privacy screen. Then I took pictures of the house keys I no longer had access to and the locked door that had left me stranded the night before. Finally, I recorded a video walking through the space, narrating the conditions and my limitations due to my hip injury. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. I had spent my life caring for others, my husband, my daughter, my home. Now it was time to advocate for myself. One phone call had been the first step. The next would be much more difficult, but necessary. I wasn't just fighting for a comfortable place to sleep. I was fighting for my dignity, for the respect I deserved, and ultimately, for my relationship with my daughter. Because the woman who had been avoiding my eyes and allowing me to sleep in a cold garage wasn't the Jessica I had raised. Somewhere beneath Alan's influence and financial stress, my real daughter was waiting to be found. And I intended to find her. 2 days later, Franklin Winters arrived at the house precisely at 10 in the morning. I had told Jessica only that my lawyer was coming to discuss some paperwork related to my medical care, a half-truth that she accepted without question. Alan's parents had departed earlier that morning, but rather than being invited back into my former bedroom, I had been informed the room needed deep cleaning before I could return. Another night on the garage cot awaited me. Franklin was exactly as I remembered, tall, silver-haired, with reading glasses perched on his nose and a leather briefcase that had seen better days. He had been Thomas's friend before becoming our lawyer, and seeing him again brought a rush of memories and emotions. He embraced me warmly before appraising my appearance with concern. "You've lost weight," he observed quietly. "And you look exhausted." I managed a small smile. "Sleeping in a garage will do that to you." Alan was working from home that day, and his expression darkened when he saw Franklin. They had met during the property transfer, and clearly Alan had not forgotten. "Corinne didn't mention you were coming," he said, not bothering to hide his suspicion. "Jessica is resting. This isn't a good time for visitors." "This won't take long," Franklin replied pleasantly, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. "I just need to review some paperwork with Corinne. Perhaps we could use the dining room. I understand Corinne has been staying in the garage, but that's hardly suitable for a meeting." Alan's jaw tightened at Franklin's pointed comment about the garage, but he nodded stiffly and gestured toward the dining room. "An hour maximum. Jessica needs quiet." Once we were seated at the dining table, Thomas's table, where so many family celebrations had taken place, Franklin opened his briefcase and removed several document folders. Alan hovered in the doorway, clearly reluctant to leave us alone. "You're welcome to join us, Alan," Franklin said, his tone still pleasant, but with an edge now. "In fact, I think it would be beneficial." Alan hesitated, then took a seat across from us, arms folded defensively. "What's this about?" Franklin slid a copy of the original deed transfer across the table. "I wanted to review some of the conditions of the property transfer with both of you. There seems to be some confusion about Corinne's rights regarding the home." Alan's face flushed. "There's no confusion. Corinne gave us the house. It's ours now." "With conditions," Franklin corrected, tapping a paragraph on the document. "Specifically that Corinne would always have the right to suitable accommodation within the home should she need it. Accommodation of a quality consistent with the primary residence," to quote the legal language. Alan's expression didn't change, but I noticed a slight twitch in his left eye. "We've provided accommodation. She has a room." "In the garage," Franklin stated flatly. "With no insulation, an inadequate heating source, and broken plumbing facilities. For a 63-year-old woman recovering from a hip fracture." He slid a tablet across the table displaying the photos I had taken. "Would you consider this consistent with the primary residence quality of accommodation?" Before Alan could respond, Jessica appeared in the doorway, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting on her enormous belly. "What's going on?" I heard voices. "Jessica, you should be resting," Alan said, quickly rising to guide her to a chair. "Franklin is just here about some routine paperwork." Franklin stood politely until Jessica was seated. "Actually, I'm here because your mother has been sleeping in a garage with inadequate facilities in violation of the conditions under which she transferred this property to you." Jessica's eyes widened, darting between me and Alan. "The garage was just temporary while Mom and Dad visited. Mom's moving back into her room today." "Is she?" Franklin asked. "Because I understand the room needs deep cleaning first, requiring another night in the garage." Jessica looked confused, then turned to Alan. You said we'd have her room ready by this afternoon. Alan's face had gone from flushed to pale. I meant to, but I have that work deadline. That's not the only issue, Jessica, Franklin continued gently. Your mother has been systematically excluded from the home she gave you. Restricted access to common areas, locked doors, separate, and unequal treatment. Jessica shook her head in denial. That's not true. Mom's always welcome here. It's her home, too. Then why? I finally spoke my voice, soft but steady. Do I eat alone in the garage most nights? Why am I not invited when you and Alan have friends over? Why did Alan lock the door so I couldn't use the bathroom? Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her husband. You locked Mom out when... It was late, Alan defended. I didn't want everyone disturbed. There's more, Jessica. Franklin said, his tone somber as he produced another document from his briefcase. Are you aware that Alan took out a mortgage on this property shortly after it was transferred to you? The color drained from Jessica's face. A mortgage? No, that's not possible. Mom gave us the house free and clear. Not only possible but done, Franklin replied. To the tune of $670,000, approximately 70% of the property's value, without Corinne's knowledge or consent, which was required under the terms of the transfer. Jessica turned to Alan, her expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. Tell me this isn't true. Alan's demeanor changed instantly from defensive to aggressive. This is none of his business. Our finances are private. They became my business, Franklin countered, when you violated the terms of the deed by taking out a mortgage without Corinne's consent and then by failing to provide her with suitable accommodation as required. Where's the money, Alan? Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. $670,000. Where is it? Alan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. You're not welcome in our house, he told Franklin. Get out before I call the police. That would be ill-advised, Franklin replied calmly, especially given the evidence of mortgage fraud we've uncovered. The bank might be very interested to learn how you obtained a loan on property with a legal encumbrance requiring Corinne's consent. Alan's face contorted with rage. You gave us this house, he snarled at me. You can't take it back just because you don't like how we're running it. I'm not trying to take back the house, I said quietly. I'm asking to be treated with basic dignity in the home I shared with you out of love, and I'm concerned about what you've done with the money and how it might affect Jessica and my grandchildren. My investments are none of your business. Investments, Jessica repeated. What investments, Alan? You told me we were saving for the twins' education. Franklin removed another document from his briefcase. According to these records, substantial sums were transferred to entities including Quickfire Investments, Eagle Ridge Development, and various online gambling platforms. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at her husband, one hand protectively covering her belly, the other gripping the edge of the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was steel. How much did you lose? Alan ran a hand through his hair, desperation replacing anger. It's not lost. The investments are just down temporarily. The market fluctuates, and the casino trips were networking for clients. How much? Each word was deliberate, final. Most of it, he admitted finally. But I can make it back. I have a system. Stop. Jessica closed her eyes briefly, her breathing deliberately controlled. When she opened them again, she looked directly at me. Mom, I had no idea about any of this. Not the mortgage, not the gambling, and certainly not how you've been treated. I thought the garage was just temporary. I thought you were comfortable. The pain and betrayal in her eyes mirrored what I had been feeling for months. My daughter hadn't been complicit. She had been deceived just as I had been. That's why you've been keeping me away from Mom. Jessica continued, turning back to Alan. All those excuses about my rest, about noise. You didn't want us comparing notes. You didn't want her seeing what was really happening. Alan began a new defense, but Franklin interrupted by producing a final document. I've prepared an amendment to the original deed transfer. It stipulates that Corinne will immediately be provided with proper accommodations in the main house with unrestricted access to all common areas. Additionally, no further loans or encumbrances can be placed on the property without her explicit written consent. Violation of these terms will result in the property reverting to Corinne's ownership. You can't do that, Alan protested. The house is ours now. Actually, we can, Franklin countered. The original transfer included conditions that have been violated. We could pursue full reversion now if Corinne wished. This amendment is actually quite generous. It's extortion. It's protection, I corrected softly. For Jessica and the twins as much as for me. I don't want to take back the house, Alan. I want my daughter and grandchildren to have a stable home, but I can't allow you to gamble it away or to treat me like an unwelcome intruder. Just then, Diana and Jack Baldwin, Alan's parents, walked through the front door. They had apparently forgotten something during their departure earlier. Diana took in the scene with concern, Jessica's tears, Alan's rage, Franklin's documents spread across the table. What's happening? Diana asked. Is everything all right? No, Jessica answered before anyone else could speak. Everything is not all right. Alan has been lying to all of us. She turned to her mother-in-law with tear-filled eyes. Did you know my mother has been sleeping in the unheated garage while you had her bedroom with a broken hip on a cot? Diana's hand flew to her mouth in shock. The garage? But Alan told us she preferred the privacy of the garage apartment. We would never have taken her room if we'd known. There is no garage apartment, Jessica said bitterly. There's a cot between storage boxes with a space heater and a broken toilet. She turned back to Alan, her expression hardening. What else have you lied about? The confrontation that followed was painful but necessary. With his parents present, Alan's defenses crumbled. He admitted to the mortgage, to the failed investments, to the gambling debts. Most devastatingly for Jessica, he confessed to deliberately isolating me to prevent me from discovering his financial deceptions. You used my pregnancy as an excuse, Jessica said, her voice breaking. You made me think the restrictions were for my health, for the babies. You made me complicit in mistreating my own mother. Alan attempted to justify his actions, claiming everything he did was for their future, but his arguments fell flat against the weight of his deceptions. When he suggested Jessica was overreacting due to pregnancy hormones, Diana Baldwin surprised everyone by intervening. That's enough, Alan, she said firmly. You've done something terrible here. To your wife, to your mother-in-law, and to your unborn children. It's time to accept responsibility. Jack Baldwin, who had remained silent until this point, added his own assessment. Son, I don't recognize the man you've become. Your mother and I didn't raise you to treat family this way, or to gamble away your children's security. Surrounded by unified disapproval, Alan finally seemed to deflate. He signed Franklin's amendment without further protest, his signature shaky but legible. Jessica, despite her distress, signed as well, adding a tearful apology as she did so. As the meeting concluded, Jessica made an unexpected request. Mom, would you help me upstairs? I need to lie down and I'd like to talk privately. In Jessica's bedroom, the master bedroom where Thomas and I had spent 30 years together, my daughter broke down completely. I'm so sorry, Mom. I had no idea how bad it was. I knew Alan was being a little difficult, but I thought it was just adjustment and stress about the babies. I never imagined he would treat you that way, or that he would mortgage the house without telling me. I held her as she cried, my own tears falling freely. I should have spoken up sooner. I didn't want to cause problems for you during your pregnancy. That's exactly what Alan counted on, Jessica said bitterly. He used my condition to manipulate both of us. She placed both hands on her belly as one of the twins kicked visibly. What am I going to do? The babies will be here in weeks, and my husband has gambled away our security and mistreated my mother." I didn't have easy answers, but I promised her one thing. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. You and the twins will never be without a home or support, no matter what. Downstairs, Franklin was preparing to leave, having accomplished what he came to do. Alan sat alone at the dining room table, head in his hands, his parents conversing in low, urgent tones nearby. The family that had seemed so perfect from the outside was fracturing under the weight of revealed truths. But sometimes, I reflected, things need to break before they can be properly rebuilt. 1 month after Franklin's intervention, our lives had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. I had been restored to a proper bedroom in the house. Not my original room, which now belonged to Jessica, but a comfortable space with a real bed, adequate heating, and full access to the house facilities. More importantly, the emotional walls that had been built between my daughter and me were gradually coming down. Alan had moved out temporarily at Jessica's insistence. The revelation of his financial deceptions and his treatment of me had shattered her trust completely. He was staying with a friend while attending financial counseling and Gamblers Anonymous meetings. Whether their marriage would survive remained uncertain, but Jessica had insisted on this separation to create space for healing and truth. "I need to understand who he really is," she explained one evening as we shared tea in the living room. "Not who I thought he was or who I wanted him to be. And he needs to understand what he's done and why it was so wrong." They were attempting counseling once-a-week sessions that Jessica reported were difficult but necessary. Alan's initial defensiveness had given way to what appeared to be genuine remorse, though Jessica remained cautiously skeptical. "Words are easy," she said. "I need to see consistent actions over time." Franklin had helped us navigate the mortgage situation. The bank, upon learning of the potential fraud, had been surprisingly cooperative rather than face legal challenges. We had negotiated a modified loan amount significantly reduced from the original, with a payment plan that would be manageable even on Jessica's teacher's salary alone, if necessary. Some of the lost money was potentially recoverable through legal action against the investment firm that had facilitated Alan's risky ventures, a process Franklin was pursuing on our behalf. Most significantly, Jessica and I had engaged in deep, honest conversations about our relationship and the dysfunctional patterns that had allowed the situation to develop. I acknowledged my tendency to sacrifice my own needs to avoid conflict, while Jessica recognized how she had allowed Alan's influence to override her own values and judgment. "I was so focused on creating this perfect family image," Jessica admitted during one particularly emotional conversation. "The beautiful house, the devoted husband, the babies on the way. I couldn't bear to see the cracks in the picture, even when they were right in front of me." One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Jessica went into labor 5 weeks early. I called the ambulance while trying to keep her calm, then contacted Alan, who met us at the hospital. Despite the complicated emotions between them, Jessica wanted him present for the birth. After 23 hours of labor, my granddaughters arrived, Lily and Emma, small but healthy, at 5 pounds each. Watching Jessica hold her daughters for the first time, exhausted but radiant, I was transported back 35 years to when I had held her the same way. The cycle of life continuing despite all our human complications and failings. The twins' arrival seemed to reset something in all of us, creating a fresh starting point from which to rebuild. Alan was gentle with the babies, his face transformed by wonder each time he held them. With Jessica, he was humble and attentive, asking permission rather than assuming, listening more than speaking. Whether this change would last beyond the magical newborn period remained to be seen, but it offered a glimmer of hope. My own recovery progressed steadily. The proper bed and reduced stress allowed my hip to finally heal completely. I no longer needed the cane and could help with the twins, something that brought me immeasurable joy. Midnight feedings reminded me of my early days with Jessica, that unique, quiet intimacy of caring for a baby while the rest of the world sleeps. Jessica and I established a comfortable rhythm, supporting each other through the challenges of recovery, hers from childbirth, mine from both physical and emotional wounds. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when the memory of the garage cot or the locked door would surface unexpectedly, bringing a wave of hurt. Jessica noticed these moments with new awareness. "Talk to me, Mom," she would say. "Don't keep it inside anymore." And I would share honestly, allowing her to apologize and me to forgive, gradually processing the pain rather than burying it beneath a desire for harmony. Alan's parents had been shaken by their son's behavior and had become unexpected allies. They called regularly, sent gifts for the twins, and maintained a relationship with me independent of Alan. Diana had written a heartfelt letter apologizing for her unwitting role in my displacement to the garage, expressing horror at what had occurred under their visit. "We raised him better than that," she wrote. "Please know we stand with you and Jessica in expecting better from him going forward." 6 months after the twins' birth, we had established a new normal. Alan had moved back into the house on a probationary basis, occupying the guest room while he and Jessica continued working through their issues. His financial decisions were now completely transparent, with regular reviews by both Jessica and an independent financial advisor Franklin had recommended. Most importantly, we had all engaged in family therapy, Alan, Jessica, the twins, and me. The therapist had helped us establish healthy boundaries and communication patterns, breaking the cycles of silence and accommodation that had allowed problems to fester. One evening, as the first real snow of winter fell outside, Jessica, Alan, and I sat together in the living room after putting the twins to bed. The room was warm, lit by the same lamps Thomas and I had chosen decades ago. Alan's financial counseling had helped him recognize the roots of his gambling and risk-taking behaviors, and he was now 6 months clean from betting of any kind. "I want to say something," he began, setting down his coffee mug with deliberate care. "Something I should have said months ago but didn't have the courage to face." Jessica and I exchanged glances, waiting. "Corinne, what I did to you was unforgivable. Not just the garage, but the systematic way I tried to push you out of your own home and away from Jessica. I was drowning in shame about the financial mess I'd created, and instead of owning it, I tried to hide it by isolating you." He looked directly at me, his eyes clear and present in a way they hadn't been before. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I understand now how deeply I failed as a son-in-law, as a husband, and as a human being. This house isn't just a building. It's the home you and Thomas created with love. I dishonored that legacy, and I'm truly sorry." His words weren't perfect, and they certainly couldn't erase the past. But they were a beginning, an acknowledgement of the harm done without excuses or deflection. I didn't respond immediately, allowing myself to feel whatever arose authentically rather than rushing to smooth things over. "Thank you for saying that, Alan," I finally said. "Healing takes time, but acknowledgement is an important first step." Later that night, alone in my room with a hot cup of tea, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From the moment I had decided to give Jessica and Alan the house through the pain of my exile to the garage, to the difficult but necessary confrontation, and finally to this fragile new beginning. I had learned painful but valuable lessons about standing up for myself, about the difference between generosity and martyrdom, about the courage required to confront uncomfortable truths. Most importantly, I had learned that true love, whether for a child, a partner, or oneself, requires honesty, boundaries, and respect. The house around me creaked with familiar sounds settling into the winter night as it had for decades. Upstairs, my daughter slept near her babies, their tiny breaths marking the passage of time into a future I would help shape but might not see fully realized. Across the hall, her husband slept separately, doing the difficult work of becoming a better man than he had been. And I, in this room that was now truly mine again, felt something I had lost sight of during those dark days in the garage, my own worth. Not as Jessica's mother or Thomas's widow, but as Corinne, a woman deserving of dignity, respect, and a place to call home. I wonder if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when it was difficult. Have you experienced the challenge of setting boundaries with people you love? Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. If my story resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true love requires respect, not the sacrifice of your self-worth.